Yo, what is happening, guys? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we finally get to talk about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. So most of you guys know that this was one of my most anticipated games coming out for this holiday because the Star Wars video game situation has been mostly a disaster for the past 5-6 years. It's been a very sad, slow trickle of two mediocre Star Wars Battlefront games in this current era where EA has the exclusive rights for Star Wars video games. But of course, we then learned that Respawn Entertainment, which is now a part of EA, had this sort of really story-focused Star Wars game plan sort of title that they were promising us was going to be exactly what we've been wanting and asking for, not forcing in multiplayer, not relying on monetization and microtransactions and loot boxes and all this stuff, and something focused on story, because it's a Star Wars property, and Star Wars, first and foremost, lives and dies on being a story medium. They're movies. That's the heart and soul of Star Wars. Yes, there's video games, and there's comics, and there's novels, and there's all these offshoots, and even a couple of TV shows. But really, Star Wars is about the movies, therefore it's about the story. And having just the two Battlefront games, even though there's good that I see in both of them, and actually Battlefront 2 here has turned into a pretty darned great game, they're still focused on just multiplayer nonsense with no real context. So give us a Star Wars video game that's about story. That's how Star Wars video games operated for decades until Lucas retires, sells to Disney, and then Disney closes LucasArts and gives EA rights. Like, in the George Lucas era, we had tons of great Star Wars video games every year. They were almost always focused on story, and it was great. But then EA kind of choked the life out of the goodness that was Star Wars video games. And so here we are today, and just yesterday, Respawn finally did release Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And it turns out that after all of the hype, the game is amazing. It pretty much delivers in every possible way you would want any game to be good, any action game to be good, and most importantly, any Star Wars game to be good. And I am so happy to report that, because we all were obviously very, very nervous about how another EA published Star Wars game was going to turn out. That wasn't something that anyone was really excited about, because they had been screwing this whole thing up since they were given the rights back in 2013, you guys. It's been almost 7 years. And we finally get this Jedi Fallen Order game, and it really is fantastic. It's not 100% perfect. There's one or two things that are kind of minor, but also kind of important things that maybe aren't the best. You know, almost no video game is actually perfect. So yeah, there's some blemishes here and there. But here I am, you know, I've got a day's worth of gameplay. I'm probably 4, 5, 6 hours or so into it. I've been to a couple of different locations. I've gotten several upgrades and new abilities and whatnot. So I've got a great grip on the first couple of hours of this game and what it's actually having you do, as well as I have a great grip on the early story beats and the story that this game is telling, because again, that's with a Star Wars game more than other games, one of the most important elements is how the story is also melded with the gameplay itself. And in the early hours, despite the couple of blemishes, I mean, this game, I just could not be happier with it. So we'll just jump right into this here at this point. Let's talk about the gameplay. Like, the main thing, yeah, it's the story also, but I can't talk too much about the story without spoiling it. And also, being a diehard Star Wars fan, I might be a little bit more attached to the minutia of the story and how they're kind of adding to and playing with the canon than a lot of other people. I will say that they are nailing it, and so that is just an A++ effort so far as the story goes. So if we focus on the other thing that we all want from a good video game, the gameplay, how does Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order stack up? It stacks up incredibly. I think the gameplay is top freaking notch. This might be the best, or tied for the best, playing action game of the year. And there's been a couple of really good ones. I think of Astral Chain, I think of Devil May Cry 5, and there might even be another one I'm brain farting in there. Code Vein, for example, which I really loved, although that's a different style of action game. As far as just pure, you know, weapon swinging action, Jedi Fallen Order might be the best, and maybe I'm biased because of my Star Wars fanship, and I'll just put that out on the table and let you guys know that here early on. But it's great. You're swinging your lightsaber, you're using some force powers, you're jumping, you're climbing, you're wall running, you're dodging, and you're upgrading your skill trees, and it's, you know, all the kind of standard stuff you expect from a game, but it comes together beautifully because they went to great lengths to making sure that the weight and the movement of Cal, the character you play as, is perfect, and that the animations are also perfect, and that they marry the weight and speed at which he moves with also the level of animation to all of his attacks and his dodges and whatnot. And it's almost perfectly seamless. It is a tricky balance. I would imagine developers struggle with this, like how much to animate, and then at what point is animation too much because it maybe slows down or affects how the character feels. In my opinion, that's something that drastically held back Uncharted 3, for example. Because I love Uncharted 1, 2, and 4, and I hate Uncharted 3 for a few reasons. One of them is they went overboard on the animation that they tried to add to the Drake character in that game, and it was to the point that it completely screwed up how it felt to control the character. It was just too much, it wasn't good. And in Jedi Fallen Order, they've eliminated almost all of that. I will admit there's a couple of times early on when you're adjusting to the rhythm of combat and how to anticipate your enemy's attacks and then attack back at them or dodge or whatever, that it's very hard, and a lot of it is due to maybe some extra animation that doesn't need to be there. I'll admit. It looks cool because of the animation, but if you do too much, it just affects how it all feels. And so there is that, but overall, it is just a complete joy to play. It's almost euphoric. All of the climbing, all of the jumping, the platforming, lots of puzzle solving, and then the combat, man. I mean, you're using your lightsaber. Very early on, you get a double-bladed lightsaber, and it's like, holy crap, we didn't even know we could do this. You're using it to light your ways. You're cutting your paths through certain areas that you're going through because you have a lightsaber, and that's what happens. Fighting enemies is fantastic. The block mechanic is great because you can just block blaster bolts, or you can time it so that you knock it right back at the enemy. And then, of course, you can also do kind of what Sekiro does, where if you do your block right at the time you're getting attacked by an enemy, you'll get the ability to do like a super move kind of finisher thing. And it's, it's borrowing tons of elements from previous games, but it brings all of them together so well in a beautiful Star Wars package that maybe some people have a problem that it doesn't have the most original gameplay elements, and I guess I get it if that's how you feel. I don't care. Video games borrow from the shoulders of giants before them, just like in music, just like in movies. And to me, this game is kind of the ultimate example of that in terms of the gameplay. And so I don't mind that it's borrowing from Tomb Raider and Uncharted and Sekiro and Dark Souls because of the meditation and the resetting your enemies element. I just think, all of these elements that it's borrowing, it's great. It's executing them all damn near perfectly. Now, if I was to try to talk about the story a little bit without spoiling too much of it, like I already said, I think that they're knocking it out of the park. It is absolutely everything I want out of a Star Wars video game. To me, I think part of the reason I'm loving it so much is because of the era that it's set in. It's set, really just a couple of years after Revenge of the Sith, and the main hook is the Order 66 moment, because that happened, in Revenge of the Sith, which in the timeline, Revenge of the Sith only takes place over a couple of days. So basically the end of Revenge of the Sith is the same as like saying, oh, Order 66 just happened. It's almost like the same thing, the same moment in time. And Cal, years later, is somebody who was a child, a Padawan, a child Jedi. He was a Padawan. He had a master with the Jedi Council. Order 66 happens, destroys all that, just throw the Jedi Council out the window. All the Jedi are dead. There's a few stragglers escaping and hiding out in the galaxy. Obviously, we know that Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of them, as well as Yoda. But Cal, who was a child Padawan, has been trying to live his whole life in the years since Order 66, where the Republic was destroyed and turned into the Empire. And this is the early years of the Empire starting to spread its rule over the galaxy, and really the government of the galaxy morphing into the Empire from what was the Republic. And of course, Jedi are like the scourge that Palpatine and Darth Vader and the Empire want to hunt down. We know that Vader was tasked with hunting down the Jedi between Sith and Episode 4 and New Hope. And so just a few years after Order 66 and Revenge of the Sith, Cal is just trying to live a life. He's got a job on, as like a scrap heaper guy, like a junker sort of dude, fixing things and on this planet. And he knows he's Force sensitive, obviously. He grew up as a young Jedi, and he's been hiding out, and events happen, and he needs to go on the run because it becomes known that he's a Jedi. And so the order of people, the Inquisitors, I don't really need to worry about saying too much, I guess. The Inquisitors, that are really a group of Force-wielding kind of bad guys that are really Darth Vader's immediate sort of army of people, they discover who he is, and so he needs to run and hide out while also getting involved in a plot to start discovering lost and hidden secrets of the Jedi that they'd left throughout the galaxy in an attempt to try to rebuild the Jedi Order. Because 8 years on, we've had no Jedi Order, and so let's try to find the couple of straggling Force-sensitive people and light-side people and leftover Jedi, and let's try to rebuild the Order and stop the Empire. That's what this story is saying is happening in the first, decade. This is 8 years after Sith. In the first decade after Order 66, the first decade of the life of the Empire in the galaxy. And so there's obviously more ins and outs to that, and there's a lot of minute details and stuff and elements that add a lot to it and make it way more organic than that. That's just my long-winded, big, overarching description of the story and kind of the early setup of the game in the very beginning. And all I can do is continue to gush about it, and I don't need to go into too many more details or spoilers. I will just say it's great, it's fantastic. I am a huge fan of the prequel era. I love the prequel films. That whole trilogy is amazing to me, and I love that era. There's a lot of Clone Wars era stuff and references and vehicles and emblems and everything. There's some cloning stuff going on. So if you're a big fan of the prequel trilogy and that era of storytelling and characters, there's a lot of that in this game, even though we're seeing the Empire walking about. And clone troopers are no more. They got decommissioned, and so now there are stormtroopers 8 years into the life of the Empire. But there's a lot of the Clone Wars were just 8-9 years ago as far as the galaxy is concerned. Cal grew up as a kid when the Clone Wars were happening. And so the context is just perfectly Star Wars. There's so much reverence happening to all things Star Wars, to all the original 6 movies, the George Lucas era. And as a George Lucas and Star Wars fanboy, it's just perfect to me. So it's teeming with all of the stuff that I love out of Star Wars. And the fact that they have all this great Star Wars goodness and they just drop you and your character into this world, into this galaxy. Once the story gets going, it's like, pick a planet, discover secrets, find the next planets we need to, go and discover those. You're playing a Dark Souls kind of Metroid backtracking thing. You're resting to meditate where you're resetting enemies, but also upgrading your skill tree. Tons of lightsaber abilities, tons of Force abilities, and it is just all married together perfectly. And also the game is beautiful. The worlds are super varied. The 4 that I've been to so far, or maybe 5, I guess. I think it's actually 5. That I've been to, they all look different, they feel different, they sound different. The music in this game, the music, you guys, you would swear to God that John Williams himself was working right alongside Respawn to score this game. It is so appropriately Star Wars. It sounds like John Williams and George Lucas made this as a movie. And so I cannot praise the music enough, especially because they don't overdo the music and it flourishes and it comes in and out and there's a lot of quiet times and you get those kind of soft John Williams Star Wars kind of flourishes, and light violins and like little triangle beats that pop in and out, and it just feels so Star Wars and sounds so Star Wars. If I was to talk about, the kind of negatives, there really isn't much. There's one thing I want to say, and it is gameplay related. And I will admit that this is something that's been improving as I've been playing more often and getting better at the game and the controls and the combat. But there is something to how they have paced the rhythm and the feel of intense lightsaber combat, because this game is very challenging, by the way. I need to mention that it is definitely a challenging game, and engaging with enemies can be very difficult. It can be very fun and gratifying, and you're force freezing and you're slicing and you're doing that stuff, but it can also be very challenging. And I think that the biggest issues I've run into is the game doesn't really make you feel, at least early on, you're not very empowered to deal with more than one enemy. This game has a big problem of allowing you to get ganged up on and teamed up on, and that's a problem in a lot of games, and a lot of good action games have ways to handle that. And I don't know how to explain it. I think of a game like Bayonetta, which is just perfect as far as gameplay and combat. And even though you can be struggling with a bunch of enemies at once, and they'll gang up on you, Bayonetta and her controls are just put together in a way that you can really manipulate your way around that and not feel overwhelmed and frustrated like you're just stripped of all power. This game, early on, that does happen, and it is frustrating. I got a little frustrated in the beginning because it's just two little bug crawling creatures that are spitting acid at you, and all it needs is 2 of them, and here you are, a badass Jedi with a lightsaber and the Force, And if you just swing once or twice at an enemy, the other one is right there busting your ass. And you're like, oh my God, I can't find a way to kill one without sacrificing half my life to the other because it's going to attack me while I'm going. And I don't feel empowered enough to kind of handle more than one at one time. And these are base level enemies. So that becomes frustrating. And on top of that, what part of what makes that hard is because of some of the animations they've thrown into your lightsaber swinging combat, it takes a certain amount of time. It's like a fraction of a second, but when you're playing an action game and we have quick reflexes here, that split second it takes for him to grab, ignite, swing, and come down, you will be shocked how many times in just this fraction of a second it takes for him to do that an enemy is going to get its hit right in on you in that little window of time and stop your attacks outright. And suddenly you're going to be fighting this weak-ass little bug alien creature or whatever, or even a base-level stormtrooper, and you're getting... all of your attacks are stopping. Like, you can be swinging like crazy, but they're going to stop you just because they've decided. And it also becomes hard to get your block moves in between when you're getting attacked and you're trying to block. You do have a block meter that runs out, so you have to be aware of what the meter looks like. But even when the meter's full... It's really easy for them to get a couple of hits on you, and you're like, no, block, you idiot, block, and he's not blocking. And so that's early on, and like I said, as you upgrade your skill tree, some of these things become less and less of an issue, and as you play more, you just get better at it. You can anticipate the rhythm and the timing of things much easier, but it is very difficult early on, and I think... It's slightly on the side of you just need to get better at it, and it's also slightly on the side of the way they developed the combat and the enemies, so that it's a little bit frustrating. And I think that they could have, I don't know, they could have found a better balance between what it's like to play against multiple enemies at once. Whoops, knocking my microphone. What it's like to face multiple enemies at once, and what it's like to have to, you know, marry the rhythm and the combat of the pairing and all that stuff. I don't know. It's crazy. It's hard. It's a little bit frustrating. It's not game-breaking, and it gets better, but it's tough. And so all in all, these are just kind of my early impressions of the game. Obviously not a full review. I've obviously not completed the game. I have many hours to go still, which I'm very excited about. And as I've said before, I've taken a week of PTO this week so that this game comes out, and I just have unlimited time to play it until I beat it. And, you know, all I can say is everything I've said already. The game is fantastic. I highly recommend it. And it's great because you don't even have to be like a Star Wars super fan to enjoy this game. I think Star Wars fans will get a lot more out of the story and the context and the characters and the events in the world and where it fits in the timeline for sure. But even if you're not a fan or you're just a very casual on the surface fan, you're just going to find a great action game. And I think that most people get pretty excited at the idea of a lightsaber. So give anyone a character with a lightsaber in his or her hand and make it a good, fun action game to play with cool traversal and cool worlds to go to, and you've got a hit. You've got everything people want out of a video game like this, and it's damn near perfect. I'm not going to say for sure, but it's making a strong case for my favorite game of the year, and I would be shocked if it doesn't become this game. We'll wait and see. I've got to wait till I've completed and compare it to some of my favorites of the year, like, you know, Fire Emblem and Resident Evil 2 and all that stuff, but it's very likely going to be my favorite game of the year, so we'll see. But either way, those are my impressions so far. The game is great. If you like Star Wars, you got to play it. If you like video games, you got to play it. It's that simple. It's incredible so far. So that's what I think. Have you guys been playing it? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Are you interested? Are you not interested? Does my impressions and my discussion here maybe convince you to check it out, whereas you previously weren't going to? Whatever, man. I just want to hear. Let's talk about Star Wars, man. It's a great time to be a Star Wars fan right now, and Lord knows we need it after the past 2 years. We got Episode 9 coming out soon. The Mandalorian's been going. It's a great time to be a Star Wars fan. So that's what I think of that. Tell me what you think below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.